Today we're going to look at how digital disruption is impacting business and demonstrate digital reinventing your quote-to-contract process. This is Sean Glumbick from Model N, and I'll be covering a couple different areas here. Then Odalis is going to come on from AstraZeneca and share some insight from their transformation of their contract management process and open it up to any Q&A that any of you have. So let's go ahead and take a look at how digital disruption is dramatically impacting how business is being conducted today. Amazon and mobile apps have dramatically skyrocketed your consumer expectations. As a matter of fact, according to IBM study, 58% of customers of a customer's buying journey is conducted digitally online before they reach out to your sales rep. Therefore, it's critical that sales organizations today are able to quickly respond to buyers' requests, assemble solutions that are tailored to your customers' needs, and generate proposals very quickly. As a result, customer transaction times are speeding up dramatically. Amazon and other mobile apps have skyrocketed consumer expectations, and according to another IBM study, 58% of customers' loyalty today is based on their buying experience with you as opposed to your product or service. Customers expect their B2B experience should be just as seamless as their B2C experience. Therefore, companies are asked their suppliers for deeper commitments, risk-sharing models, and more complex contract relationships today. With growing product commoditization and increased pricing transparency, companies are turning to customer experience to differentiate themselves with a competitive edge. According to Accenture, 84% of companies today expect to compete on customer experience to grow their revenues. A customer's buying experience means that sales reps' knowledge needs to be dramatically increased to guide the buyers through the sales process smoothly. New competitors are emerging every day because digitization has dramatically reduced the barriers to enter new markets, geographies, and offer new business models. Just take a look at Netflix, Uber, Airbnb, and Amazon Web Services, to name a few. According to IBM, 60% of today's CEOs globally expect increased competition from outside their traditional industry, and only 8% believe that their current business model is viable in the digital world. Therefore, it's critical that companies are able to quickly respond to customers' demands today. However, only 50% of companies believe that their quote and contract approval process today negatively impacts sales by stalling or losing deals, according to Selling Power survey. Furthermore, 85% of companies are using manual processes, as Tim mentioned in the beginning, to manage their sell-side contract process. Furthermore, it's estimated that a typical business with just 1,000 employees wastes between $2.5 and $3.5 million a year searching for and recreating lost contract documents. By digitally transforming their contract process, businesses can increase revenue by up to 9%. That's why 81% of today's CEOs want to leverage technology to strengthen their customer relationships. However, 66% of companies today will not be able to maximize their digital transformation because they're held back by dated technology. And that's why today it's critical that you digitally reinvent your quote-to-contract process in order to transform your customer's buying experience. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Bernard.
Thanks, Sean. For our demonstration today, we will be taking you through a day in the life of the quote-to-contract process and the real value of digital transformation. We will start by showing you how you can increase contract value by 30% using guided selling and other cross-selling and upselling techniques. Then being able to reduce the overall contract cycle time by 60% and reduce admin and operation costs by A, generating a paper contract complete with pre-approved clauses, collaborating with your prospect on contract redlining, using intelligent approvals to reduce the internal cycle time, and finally, leveraging intelligence to drive revenue by monitoring contract risk, value, and overall compliance. So let me pass it over to Hee-Jun for the first part of our demonstration today.
Thanks, Bernard. Is everyone able to see my dashboard? I'll take silence as yes, because everyone is on mute. But here I am logged in as Sam Reppert, a sales rep who is coming into the Model N Revenue Cloud to just take a look at his pipeline of quotes by value, by phase, to look at his current opportunities, some recently closed opportunities, as well as opportunities that are still in process, as well as deals that are represented by quotes associated with those opportunities. Based upon his recent activity, we see that he has a quote in process for Burlington Design, location 3 for an enterprise network within a manufacturing price segment. The first year value is currently $0 because he hasn't completed that quote yet. And I'll actually go through that process of reviewing the quote and managing my guided selling process so that we can see products and solutions that will add value to this particular opportunity. I see here in my quote that we're taking a look at the quote process and life cycle, like many of the business processes, including contract lifecycle management, as we'll see in a moment. We will also manage our quotes through that same life cycle. This assures that everyone is taking advantage of best practice as we go through this process. As we're in the draft state of the quote, I'm starting by actually managing my products. All of the actions that you see in those quotes are configurable and really guides a sales rep through the process. Here we see that we're adding new products. You're able to search through your catalog or just type in here. In this case, I'm looking for a new office solution for Burlington Design. I'll go ahead and select this particular solution and go through a few simple steps to answer some questions, provide information about my opportunity that will help me come up with the ideal solution. I'll actually here identify the customer segment. Is it a small, medium business, enterprise, or data center? Since this is an enterprise customer, I'll select that, and then it guides me through additional questions. What are the capabilities that would be required in this solution? And in this case, for this particular project, the client is just looking for email and database for an online store. We see that we have some additional questions that need to be fulfilled in red, marked in red along the left, in order to finally apply the business rules. We need to know the number of employees to calculate the licenses and the server that are needed for this solution. Based upon that employee volume, we see that the server has been assigned, software has been assigned. I don't have to remember tiered pricing, so for those particular volume of users, I only need 20 licenses. I have tiered pricing here as well. And as I review my pricing and I scroll down to the additional elements of my solution, I see that software licenses are here, services installation and support has been included, but I still have the opportunity to actually upsell.
That is great, Hee-Jun. Upsells and being able to price correctly greatly increases your contract value.
I can see here that based upon my discussions, they'd like a chassis switch. If I need additional information about that product in particular, I can select it and articulate the value of that solution based upon standardized information and messaging that's provided through my solution. With this, I think I'm satisfied with the quote that it exists and the offering that I'm able to make to my customer. So I'm going to go ahead and save and close that solution, and it will automatically include that list of products at those prices to my quote.
Thanks, Hee-Jun. Guided selling really helps reps be more responsive to customers' needs and really enhances their overall buying experience, which is important. The value to organizations is huge. And according to Aberdeen, you can increase your contract value by 2 times by getting the right products and prices and using recommended cross-sells and upsells. It also increases your win rate by 17% by getting those products in line. And winning more at better margin means 26% more sales reps hit their target, right? So we often hear that organizations that have, internal, that have these challenges also have challenges with internal processes that are too slow and complex. So let's move on to our demo and see how we can help you reduce your internal time to process contracts by 60% using Model N CLM. This time, Hee-Jun will be playing a few roles. A sales rep using one click to create a contract. A second role as the contract manager to expedite redlining with the customer. And finally, expediting the internal workflow using intelligent approvals. So I'll hand it back to Hee-Jun for the next part of our demo.
Thanks, Bernard. Back to my quote here as Sam. I see here that this quote, because I haven't offered any steep discounts in this opportunity, I'm able to automatically go to my negotiation phase by indicating that we're ready for customer. If I had broken any price rules, any discount rules, or any other business processes, there might have been a challenge through an approval process that would have presented itself in that life cycle. But since everything met the business rules for passing on directly to negotiation, I'm now ready to convert my quote to contract. So by a single click, I'm able to take that and initiate that contract directly and collaborate with my contract manager. Here, I can say Tony, and we'll look for Tony Grant, my contract administrator, and I'll send him a little message.
That's great, Hee-Jun. So you can easily collaborate with Tony via chatter, but you can also receive it via email that will include a link that will drive him back to the contract. So now, Hee-Jun, are you ready to play the role of the contract manager?
Yep. I've just let Tony know that the new contract is ready, and I'll take a look at what Tony will see. Here's Tony. I'm taking a look at logged in the morning. I'm taking a look at my contract pipeline, contracts that are expiring in the upcoming periods, in this case for the next year. I also see deals that I'm working in the same way that Sam saw deals. So we're really looking at the same page. We're looking at enterprise data within the repository that's really unified between my sales process and contract process. I see that I have a task that someone set for me where I have an opportunity for Burlington Design with my enterprise network that I need to create a contract for. I also see that I have a new message here. Little notification. I see that Sam has mentioned me in a comment, and that simple collaboration through that chatter feed allows me to see that Tony sent me a message, the new contract for BI is ready. I can click on that and see if there's any detail behind it, and actually click on that contract and go directly from my notifications page into that contract record. So here, just taking a look, we see that now we're presented with the contract lifecycle, which will go through phases of draft, collaboration, approval, signature, and activation, completely configurable to match your standard processes. But in this case, these steps will take this sales contract through to execution. We see some information about the account, all completely inherited from that quote that Sam created and converted to this contract. So no reentry, no room for error, no questions missing from fields that are required. The products and services are also brought over directly from that quote. So the pricing, the quantities, the actual services and products that are included on that contract are accurately converted with that quote detail into the contract. So back to this contract. Since I've reviewed some of the details, I feel comfortable starting to assemble or draft my contract document. We'll actually be selecting a template. Here I have a version that I can select from, a standard Global One sales contract, and I also have a French version as well. But since this customer is in the US, I can automatically select that Global One and go ahead and assemble that. So using the standard contract templates that we have in the library, based upon the products, services, and attributes, we'll be creating a standard document that allows us to view that content.
That's great, Hee-Joon. And the document will also pull in pre-approved clauses and any conditional clauses, for example, based upon the products that are selected. So as a contract administrator, I really don't have to know which products pull which clauses. The system actually auto-generates it for me.
So as we're waiting for that contract document to come up, give it a couple seconds here. If not, I'll just refresh the page. My internet might have gotten a little bit clogged up here. So we see here that the contract has been created, the contract document has been created based upon the standard language that we have within the system, using controlled document templates, and then inserting additional clauses as needed in order to satisfy the particular requirements of this contract. Dynamic clause generation based upon those attributes can include that dynamic text that organizations typically manage through big notes, highlights in those standard templates to say only include this type of language if the customer is asking for special conditions, or only include it if the governing law is in North Carolina, just as an example. In this particular case, we see that this equipment and software agreement has been generated. We're actually including some of the bookmarked information directly from the contract and inherited from the quote. We see that the contract information is included at the line level in the detail with the pricing. And as we go down, we can see standard signature blocks, Schedule A for general terms and conditions, as well, in this case here, an example of payment terms. And we see here that the payment terms, because they're highlighted, is a controlled clause that's coming from the clause library. Whether it's dynamically inserted or we just want to track this for reporting purposes, we really would like to see the visibility of this clause lifted out above the standard text in the contract document. So we go down here, we can review just the rest of the standard agreement, but I'd like to actually log into Model N Author and access my clause library and insert some additional standard language based upon what I know about this deal. Once we get into Model N Author, we're actually able to interact with any changes that I've made to this document offline and access standard information from the system as well. Gives me the opportunity to work on offline and configure, but also then, when I'm ready, access information such as my clause library. Reviewing the clause library with this sales contract, the types of clauses that I have available. I have acceptance testing, general provisions, a backup, payment and shipping terms, or other payment terms options. I'm going to go ahead and include this acceptance testing and make sure that it looks the way I want. And that looks good. By including that, now I'm going to set my track changes. Optionally, you can set this by default, but I'll set it now so that I can send this out to my customer as a first version that they will see, and any changes will be redlined. I'm going to go ahead and save that to the system with my comments. And interacting directly within my Word document, I'm able to push this content directly to the library, to the repository. So back in my contract, once that has been updated, I'm actually going to share that with my client by sending an email. And it will track that email, and I know this is going to my contact, John Andrews. And we see that some information, standard email template is provided. And we see that that particular document is attached automatically. I'll go ahead and send that to them. And this really operates just as typical negotiations do today. Email looks like it's coming directly from you, from your corporate account, goes out to the customer, allows them to open up that document, make any red lines and changes, and basically email that back to you and have your changes pushed back into the system from their revisions. Rather than go through that round trip with the customer, what I'm going to do is go ahead and download that document and make the changes myself as if I am the customer. So we'll open that document. This is the new version that we have, including those changes that I made. And acting as the customer, what I'd like to do is go ahead and make a change to some of those terms that are within the system. So rather than net 30, I'm going to actually ask for net 60. And we see that track changes is automatically keeping that information. I'm actually just going to delete some text here. And we're keeping track of all of that. And then your customer would just attach this to an email, send it back to you. And as you open that document up, acting as the contract manager now, I would see that, oh, there are some changes that were made, fully supporting all of the capabilities in the review process with Microsoft Word. I can then go ahead and accept all changes, accept, move to next, or reject changes as necessary. I'll go ahead and accept those changes. And now with those changes that have been accepted, what I'd like to do is update that to the system. So since I'm connected, I could be working on this offline, and it'll give me the opportunity to log into the system again to simply check that version into the system. And it remembers that I'm Tony, the contract manager here. So I'll go ahead and this time, rather than accessing the clause library, I'll go ahead and save that to the system. And as it processes that document back into the repository, it knows that since we're tracking that payment term as a piece of important and critical contract information, shows me that the old value is net 30 and the new value is net 60. Since this will now need to go through some approval processes internally, I'll go ahead and save that with my comment for that version of the document. I don't need to save those changes since everything will be posted to the repository. And I come back to my contract. And I'll actually start my review process. So based upon any information in my contract, I can initiate a smart, intelligent review process that understands that based upon specific attributes of this client or this contract, I'll need to process specific review steps. This is automatically going to be sent to Charlie Brown because the contract payment term is not 30 days. So I know exactly why it's going to particular approvers. The legal approval is initiated automatically as a final step to vet all of those red lines and changes, and it can also be initiated on specific data values as well. If I have the ability, and if you have configured the system this way, you can additionally add approvers by searching for them within the system based upon role, based upon user, or based on whatever security attributes that you have set up for that process. I'll go ahead and submit that. And I choose to include a particular document. And I'll ask those to review it. And now that review process has been initiated. You also see that automatically all of my activity has been tracked in my feed here. The customer contract has been submitted for approval. We see that here automatically. We also see that it's gone out to specific legal reviewers and finance reviewers within the system. We see here that Tony has posted to my profile automatically a message that based on non-standard payment terms, I'm going to need to approve this. I can click on that link, download that document here. I also see that I have a formal approval request from my email. And I can just download this document, review it, make any changes or red lines, publish that to the system. I can as well just reply, yes, approved, or any of the key words, and go ahead and send that. That will actually process in the system and update the actual approval process in the system. Back as the contract manager, out of curiosity, I just take a look and manage my approvals, and I see that Charlie Brown has already approved that just through the action of replying to that email. We see that the next person is Leo Graham, who will do the final legal approval. And I can go to Leo's email and refresh that. And we see that same approval request, also a posting to my profile and my feed, so I can see that directly from the system. And as the legal user, I'll go ahead and approve this contract as well. I'll come back to my approval status page, and if I refresh that, we'll see the update and approval from Leo. All of those are captured, time and date stamped, and we can return to the contract. So with that, we see that we've automatically moved to the signature process. Seamlessly, we've captured those enterprise approvals, we've moved through, and automatically promoted that to the next step in the process. We won't go through the e-signature process today in the interest of time, but I'll go ahead and complete a wet signature and then activate that contract to show that that process has been completed. Bernard, back to you.
Great. Thanks, Hee-Jun. According to Aberdeen, technologies that enable people to effectively collaborate and redlining and streamline the approval processes not only reduce cycle time, but improve customer responsiveness. Overall, you can reduce your cycle time by 60% and admin costs by 40%. both of which lead to customer satisfaction and hitting renewal rates at around 30%. I think the last section we have is intelligence, but maybe we should move to the last section with Odalis and hear from AstraZeneca.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Dallas.
Good morning, everyone. Glad to be here. Pleasure to join everybody. Thank you for the opportunity. I'd like to introduce myself. My name is Odalis Capraseca. I am part of the market access team for AstraZeneca, where I oversee our pricing and contract operations. I don't know if we can just, there you go. Thank you. So a little bit of background about AstraZeneca. Obviously, AstraZeneca is a global science-led company in the pharmaceutical area. We have quite a bit of a diverse portfolio as well as a very diverse customer base. We have concentrations in 3 key therapeutic areas, that is oncology, respiratory, cardiovascular, metabolic disease. Within those portfolios, we cover quite a bit of variations of products, both injectable, infused, as well as oral. And currently, AstraZeneca has over 50 users in this CLM process currently. So part of our original business challenges when we embarked on this project was talking about the speed of execution. We were in a manual process. So of course in a manual process you have the issues of lots of paper, lots of iteration, lots of hands moving, physically moving paper from one desk to another or via email. So we were having a challenge of speed of execution and ensuring that we were meeting or beating our competitors with our customers' requests for proposal. It was also about the ease of that contract review and collaboration. Obviously, we all know that when creating a contract, it is not one single individual. It's a cross-functional collaboration between your sales force, between perhaps brand, manufacturing, legal, compliance, those pieces. So it was quite a bit of a issue collaborating with those. In many cases, people are obviously in different time zones, different locations. So how did we actually ensure that we were being very efficient in moving those papers, capturing all of the required necessary documentation, the version and control, the comments from one to another, which of course then leads to the next piece, which is the overall efficient process of the approvals, ensuring that the individuals that were held responsible for approving the final document were seeing everybody's comments, were in fact seeing the last and final document, and of course ending up with the final approval from a compliance standpoint. So when the internal business approval happened, did we ensure that we passed the correct document over to our compliance and legal? And then of course, ultimately, was that the document that got implemented in there? So there was quite a bit of tracking down and ensuring, and a lot of manpower to ensure that we were doing it in a compliant legal manner. We were really getting out the quote that we wanted to get out, and then of course doing it in a timely fashion to ensure that we would meet our competition needs.
So yeah, this is Tim joining you. So what about any sort of legacy systems? What is it that you were using previously to try and manage the complexity you described, and did you have particular challenges, I suppose, with that legacy system that led to support for change?
So the legacy system, if we would even call it a legacy system, was pretty much obviously the Word document process, and then we would have a common SharePoint box type of location that we had as an intra connection. So again, as we can manage it, there wasn't a very good place from a versioning perspective. There wasn't a very good place to keep master terms or a library, or if a contract analyst needed to prepare a document and we said, hey, what are our standard audit clause, or what's our standard out clause? There wasn't a single place that they would have to go to just pull it down. It would literally be, oh, well, go see contract ABC. I think we used that language there. So from a legacy system, it was pretty much a Word document with a SharePoint. We had tried to use some other out-of-the-box type legacy systems. We tried one or two, but again, we ran into similar situations where we couldn't have an ease of collaboration and an ease of workflow approval. The templates and the libraries were somewhat limited, as I mentioned, because of our diverse portfolio and the very diverse customer base. There were scenarios where we needed to have somewhat of a firewall between our agreements. We have both service agreements as well as discount agreements. Given the world that we live in, the two shall never meet. So we had some challenges in ensuring that we had the appropriate firewalls between those two.
Yeah, interesting. So it sounds as if you were really very much in that 85% that were struggling to find relevant information to really have coherent data flows that could support good decision making. So let's hope, I imagine the fact you're on this webinar, that you're now experiencing some real improvement. So maybe you could just talk for a moment then about how Model N Contract has helped you to solve those sort of challenges.
Yeah, so we've been live on the Model N system now for a year. It was a year in January, so a little bit over a year. And it has dramatically changed the way we do our contracting. So everything now is actually in the Model N system. So it's centralized, again, over 50 users that we have in there, and the 50 users are also, of course, our collaborators. So compliance is in there, legal is in there. So we now have one central repository that any type of senior leaders can go into and address any kind of contracts, pull down those contracts. We've created a scenario where our contract analysts are not necessarily in a position where they're creating contracts all the time. They're more likely drafting them and putting them together. So we now have our core library that we say, if we're going to do a contract for a oncology product with this customer type, this is the contract template that we start with. Obviously understanding that all customers have a little bit of a difference, sometimes have their own paper versus just our standard template, but at least it is a much more efficient process because it's now then just adding those final tweaks that makes a difference. And if you follow that through from a collaboration perspective, if you think about your legal review, your compliance review, your business reviews, because you know it's coming from a standard template, you're not reviewing those things. So it is very clear when you look at the document, oh, okay, I'm going to go look for the product, for the terms, for the rates. I don't need to look at my audit clause. I don't need to look at my termination clause because we have all previously approved them already. So the turnaround time of creation, the turnaround time of actual collaboration and approval has decreased immensely. We currently are running over 400 contracts coming out of that system.
That's a tremendous story. I think we probably led you to sort of cover this slide a little bit back to front because, of course, that's great examples of some benefits. But one of the things that our research has shown is that for many organizations, there's tended to be I guess, a mismatch between the system and the process, leading to lots of confusion, and again, very often leading to the system not really getting properly adopted. What did you do to ensure that the system was actually configured in a way that you avoided that problem?
Yeah, so it was interesting because when you think of the configuration, right, so when we were actually going through the process and installing the system, it was a different type of configuration. It really wasn't necessarily the configuration of the system, but as you mentioned before, it was much more the configuration of the process, because we were going from such a manual, paper-driven type process, the configuration was really much more on the business side of how are we mapping out this process? What should it look like? You know, what are the key steps? What are the checkpoints that we should have at it? And then, of course, during that, that's how we then set up the system. When I work with the system, I don't necessarily see it as a configuration because it's quite simple. I see it much more as a setup. So these are my setups of types of contracts. This is my setup of types of library and clauses that I need to do, or this is the setup of how my workflow goes. So I think the challenge actually from our end was really sitting back and challenging our business processes and making sure that we're not trying to recreate the insanity that we had with all of this paper, but really saying, you know, what should this look like? What are the steps? What are the main stop points of verification? And then just kind of setting up the system to help support that.
Yeah, I think, well, clearly you discovered the right answer, and I think, of course, far too many do just try and put in a system on top of the existing fragmented and very often very poorly defined range of activities that make up contracting. So I'm sure, however, even with all that thought going in behind it, that the whole implementation and selection activities, etc., was not challenge-free. What would you say was perhaps the biggest obstacle you had to overcome?
I think the biggest obstacle that we had to overcome was twofold. One was, again, really challenging our team. It was an internal, challenging our team to say, step back of how you're doing it, really think about what it is we need to accomplish and how do we get there. So it was really taking, you know, these 50 users saying, stop thinking of what you're doing today, really focus on what is it that we need to do, and then drafting it from there. So we wanted to ensure that we didn't kind of bring our old bad habits along with us and really take advantage of what the system would offer. Along with that, I think the other biggest challenge we had was making sure we had it right. Again, you know, did we have the latest and greatest version of that contract? Was that the right one? Did we have the right clause? So making sure that what we were putting into the system was the right thing. So there was a lot of upfront work, again, a large collaboration with our legal and our compliance and our external partners to making sure that what we were putting into that system was the best and most accurate information. You know, the old, what you put in is what you're going to get out of it. So I think the biggest challenge was, again, going across those 400 contracts and making sure that what we were loading into the system as our baseline was the most accurate. That was definitely very challenging. And again, because of where we came from a manual process.
So for our audience today, any particular sort of lessons learned that you would suggest they should be considering, particularly as it relates, I guess, to that sort of aspect of change management?
Yeah, I think the biggest lesson learned, and we did this across the entire implementation when we implemented this portion of the Model N enterprise, we also implemented more some of the other modules as well. I think the biggest lesson learned from that project that I would share with anyone is twofold. Is one, really refocus your people and get them away of, I do it by pushing these 5 buttons. Really challenge them to say, what is it we're trying to accomplish, and make that the focus versus, hey, I take these 10 steps. That was instrumental in our project to ensure that we were really getting the full benefit of what the system offered, but more importantly, you know, we are quote unquote what they call out of the box. We didn't have to put ourselves into a scenario where we customized or we built something special. So literally, we are in a position where you can scale and easily continue to receive updates without any kind of major implications to the system. That was one. I think the second biggest learning in preparation, I think we would have done it we would have done a little bit more prep work in getting our data ready. Of course, we didn't even think about it as much as we should have, and in the midst of the project, you know, kind of getting those 400 contracts and coming together to say, this is what AstraZeneca says should be the standard termination clause. This is what we believe is the standard master terms. I think the learning is do that earlier. Do not underestimate how long that really takes, and the collaboration and the sign-off of everybody.
I'm sure there were challenges at times, of course, with probably bringing not only your own team but other stakeholders in line with the change. And of course, that's always something which really requires a level of leadership and good communication.
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
So if we can maybe move to what I think is our final slide and just talk a little bit about the benefits you've seen, both in terms of the in terms of that Model N implementation, what business improvements has digitization brought to your contract process?
Yeah, I think I can bucket them in the three areas that we talked about here. Is absolutely the reduced cycle time, the amount of time that it takes us to turn around a RFP or an RF or request or any type of non-binding offer has dramatically decreased. We can turn around pretty much a non-binding offer or a very quick, you know, one product, one type of thing within 24 hours. Never happened before. So our overall reduced cycle time has immensely happened on that. And again, a big piece of it is because of those templates and those set agreements, that if I'm using a agreement that has 100% clauses from our pre-approved library, I don't have to put that through compliance and legal again. So again, it's absolutely reduced not only the cycle time for the contract analyst to create it, but the workflow time for the approval process has reduced immensely. The second piece of it is the actual time to execute. So once those contracts come back and you're in that situation where you are redlining with your customer, because of the features in the system that allows you to see prior and before and what's been changed versus kind of sitting there in Word and trying to go through that. And again, going back to what we have set as a baseline of pre-approval, it actually has reduced the time of execution. We're averaging right now that our time to execution has been reduced by 3 days. So that has been a great big difference there. And then ultimately, it's the business optimization. I think that was a little bit of a surprise as well, in realizing once you have these standard terms for whatever there might be, whether they're your payment terms or your shipping terms or anything, the fact that you have these standard terms, that you know the financial impact and you know that those are the most fair and equitable conditions for you and your partner, it actually has put us into a business optimization standpoint that we are much more predictable when it comes to those pricing terms and conditions. And then, of course, the overall the resource load across not only my team, but to your point, as you mentioned before, the reduction in the load with our legal, with our compliance, with our brand teams and things like that as well.
So I'd just like to turn, if we could, quickly to a couple of questions. We're pretty much out of time, but an interesting one from Alden, actually, that looks at this from an impact from a clinical perspective. To what extent has using the system changed the level of staffing for managing contracts? And I think we've already heard from what you've said that it does actually achieve the sort of benefits that the Model N team mentioned earlier. But I guess I'd be interested in not just the level of staffing, but has it changed the nature of the work and the visibility that your team finishes up having in the business?
Yeah, so our staffing headcount per se has not changed, but what we have gotten the ability to do is actually change the roles and responsibilities that the analysts are playing. So there was no headcount reduction. That was not the purpose of it. But what's happening is because there is less focus, what I would consider in the paper pushing, we are now moving our analyst, I call it kind of moving them up further in the decision-making tree. So what's happening now that we have this flexibility and this ability to be a little bit more agile, we are now having the opportunity that we as my analyst team are actually being much more involved in the development of the strategy. They're part of the development of the overall outcomes. So having that experience of the customer, knowing the customer, knowing the back and forth of the negotiation, but having that extra time to be able to spend with the brand or with that strategy team to say, what is the intent that we are trying to cause with this agreement, has now added that much more ease, especially when they are in that back and forth negotiation of the red lines. It stops them from having to go back to the strategy people or back to the brand people going, I don't know if what they're asking me in the red line is okay. Is this okay with you? Is this what you wanted them to do? So really what's happening is these analysts are now moving much more into what's important in the actual strategic development and the potential outcomes of it.
Thank you for that. I'm just going to try and cover two more quick questions, if we may. Bernard, one of the interesting questions always, of course, is for many organizations having to deal with the mix of their own paper and non-standard or customer paper. Is Model N set up in ways it really can deal with contracts no matter their source?
Good question. Yes, we do. We support third-party paper. We also support virtually any type of contract, product contracts, SLAs, SOWs, non-product contracts are all part of our standard solution set.
And well, I guess both of you would perhaps have an opinion on this. Obviously, many organizations seem to struggle with being able to develop an ROI for automation, and that's largely, of course, because of the weakness of those traditional data flows, the inability to really demonstrate coherently what the cost or the benefit, cost reduction or benefit aspects would be. What pressure was there in the case of the AstraZeneca implementation, firstly to calculate an ROI, and I suppose the second big question, was there a strong executive sponsor here, and if so, where did that come from?
So from an AstraZeneca perspective, there was a very large executive support all the way to the top. Again, as I mentioned before, the implementation of this portion was part of a larger implementation of the Model N enterprise. So there was support all the way from the top. Again, our intent of the project was not a headcount type project. It was much more of a roles and responsibility. We needed to do certain things better, but because of the limitations of the time that processes took, we weren't able to do it. So we knew that we needed to move much more into that strategic aspect of it. We needed to spend more time thinking about what it is we wanted to do versus trying to push paper around. So again, the objective was from the very top saying we need to do this better. And how can we simplify the process so we're spending the right time of our people and our knowledge and our expertise in the right areas.
And Bernard, I imagine that you regularly find with digitization that, of course, contracting as a process quickly becomes exposed because of its manual nature, because of all the friction points it involves. So presumably you are seeing more and more that as organizations digitize, the whole area of contracting naturally rises to the top as something that needs to be tackled.
Yes, we see these often, and actually that's part of our value assessment, where we come in and evaluate their contract processes, organization, and work with prospects and organizations to understand how we can digitize the entire process.
So I'm conscious of the fact we're now a few minutes over time. There are a number of questions still outstanding, but Bernard, obviously you and the team at Model M will have access to those, and so we can absolutely make sure that they get answered. Udalis, thank you so much for giving us those insights to what this has meant in practice at AstraZeneca, and with that, I'll say thank you to everyone who's been involved and given us some real insights into the ways that automation can indeed dramatically and beneficially impact that whole contracting process. And, thank you to our audience for being with us. Obviously, if you have any questions, the slide tells you where you can direct them. Thank you again, and goodbye for now.
Thank you, everybody.